The machine that should not have been on a beach. The German officer stared through his binoculars, blinking against the gray spray of the early morning waves off Normandy. Sound rolled across the shore like distant thunder. Landing craft engines, bursting shells, the crackle of machine gun nests buried deep inside the cliffs. But he wasn't looking at the infantry scrambling through the surf. He wasn't watching the tanks trying to claw their way past the Belgian gates and steel obstacles. He wasn't even tracking the destroyers firing point-blank at the strong points. He was staring at something absurd. A shape, a color, a silhouette that had no business being on a battlefield, much less the most fortified beach in the history of warfare. A bulldozer, a bright yellow American bulldozer, groaning its way down the ramp of a landing craft as if it had simply taken a wrong turn off a highway construction site and somehow ended up at the gates of Fortress Europe. For a moment, the German officer lowered his binoculars. He thought he was hallucinating. But no, there it was. Armored plating bolted to its sides, men cheering behind it and ahead of it. Rows of deadly obstacles the German engineers had sworn would stop any invader. The officer muttered only 3 words. Das ist unmöglich. This is impossible. It was not only possible, it was the beginning of the end. What the Germans were witnessing on that beach was not just a bulldozer. It was the physical embodiment of a continent-wide industrial power that had finally arrived to crush them. This is the story of how a construction machine became one of the most important weapons of D-Day, tearing through Hitler's defenses, clearing paths for thousands of troops, opening roads where no road had ever existed, and proving once again that in modern war, logistics destroys empires. Before the beaches, before the invasion, long before it stormed Normandy, the American bulldozer was born in the most unlikely place, the farms and fields of the United States. During the 1920s and 1930s, Caterpillar tractors reshaped the American landscape, building highways, moving timber, flattening land for farms, carving out reservoirs. They were loud, ugly, indestructible things, but they were reliable. They were simple, and as it turned out, they were perfect for war. By 1941, the U.S. military was studying these machines with growing interest. The Army didn't need beauty. It didn't need elegance. It needed movement, the power to reshape terrain faster than the enemy could fortify it. American generals asked a simple question. What if these machines could go to battle? Caterpillar engineers, half amused and half terrified, watched soldiers test the tractors by driving them through forests, over trees, into mud pits, and up hills that would break a lesser machine. The Army's final report was a single line. They will do. Nobody realized how important that decision would become. By 1944, every military planner in the Allies knew one horrifying truth. The Germans had turned the beaches of France into the most heavily fortified coastline in human history. Across 2,400 miles of European shore, Hitler's Atlantic Wall resembled a monstrous steel skeleton. It bristled with steel hedgehogs, Belgian gates welded to the sand, mines buried in obstacles, pillboxes with steel doors 30 centimeters thick, trenches and anti-tank ditches, barbed wire that stretched like metal spiderwebs. Every inch of the beaches was designed to kill. Rommel, the desert fox, had been explicit. He said, "We must stop the enemy on the beach. If they get inland, we lose the war." His philosophy was simple. Don't let them advance even 10 meters inland. Stop them on the sand itself. So the Germans built obstacles the size of trucks, made of reinforced steel beams, designed to flip over landing craft, rip open tank treads, and funnel men into machine gun fire. The British planners stared at the photos and simply said, "There is no way through." But the Americans had a different idea. Don't go around the obstacles. Don't blow them up one by one. Just plow through them. With a machine that didn't know fear. A bulldozer. The men behind the blades. The 121st Engineer Combat Battalion, along with dozens of other engineer units, trained for a job almost nobody envied. Clearing the way through hell. Their official name was Combat Engineers. Their unofficial name, whispered even by infantrymen, was Suicide with a Shovel. These were not regular construction workers. They trained with weapons, explosives, flamethrowers, mines, and heavy machinery. They learned to build bridges under fire, repair roads at night, defuse mines by touch alone, and drive bulldozers wearing flak jackets inside armored cabins. They were told the truth. You are the first through the obstacles. If you fail, the entire invasion fails. No pressure. Men like Sergeant Harold Sturgis, a bulldozer operator from Indiana, memorized every inch of the machine, how to restart it under fire, how to angle the blade to shove aside a Belgian gate, how to avoid mines buried in the obstacles, how to drive blind through smoke, how to push aside a burning wreck without getting trapped. He wrote home, "I don't think the Germans will expect anything like what we're bringing." He was right. 6:30 a.m., June 6, 1944. The beaches are a nightmare. When the first waves hit Utah and Omaha, chaos erupted instantly. Landing craft missed their marks. Men were dropped into deep water. Some tanks never made it to shore. Machine gun fire rained from the cliffs. The German strongpoints, WN5, WN7, WN62, spat so much lead into the surf that some rifle companies lost 30% of their men in minutes. The problem was immediate and obvious. Troops couldn't advance because the obstacles were blocking everything. They couldn't take shelter. They couldn't move laterally. They were pinned down. The invasion was in danger of stalling before it had even begun. General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. radioed the Navy. "Send the engineers. We need the Dozers now." And that single decision would change the entire battle. Chapter 5: The Dozers arrive. From the haze of smoke offshore, the first LCTs carrying bulldozers approached the beach like lumbering metal whales. German gunners stared in disbelief. Tank? No. Armored personnel carrier? No. A bulldozer. A massive yellow beast with a giant steel blade in front, armor plates welded around the driver's seat, and thick tracks capable of digging into sand like claws. The Germans opened fire instantly. Shells slammed into the blade. Bullets pinged off the armor. Mortars cratered the sand nearby. But the bulldozer didn't stop. It didn't swerve. It didn't even slow down. It simply roared forward. Sergeant Sturgis later said, "I was too scared to die, so I just kept driving." Behind the dozer, dozens of infantrymen followed, crouching low, using the blade as a shield. It was the first mobile cover they'd had all morning. And the Germans realized, too late, this machine was unstoppable. The first path through hell. The bulldozer reached the first line of Belgian gates. Towering steel obstacles welded together like enormous metal crosses. Normally, clearing them would take hours. Explosives, wire cutters, teams of engineers crawling under fire. But Sturgis had a different approach. He dropped the blade, gunned the engine, and rammed the obstacle. The steel groaned, bent, and slid aside like it was nothing more than a toy. German soldiers inside the bunkers stared, mouths open. This was not in their manuals. This was not a tactic they had expected. This was brute industrial force at its purest. In minutes, the bulldozer cleared a gap wide enough for tanks and trucks. The infantry surged behind it, yelling and firing, finally finding momentum on a beach that had nearly become their grave. One German machine gunner later told a POW interrogator, "When I saw that machine, I said to my commander, if they bring these, we cannot stop them." The dozers turned the tide. More dozers landed. Some were destroyed instantly. Shells tore through the armor. Flames engulfed the cabins. But others kept going. At Omaha, a dozer famously cleared a path through a minefield by detonating mines with its blade, shielding the men behind. At Utah, engineers used dozers to push aside burning landing craft, creating open routes for vehicles. At Gold and Juneau, they demolished anti-tank walls. At Sword, they shoved beach obstacles into tank traps, filling them enough for armored vehicles to pass. Everywhere they went, they created order out of chaos. Historian Stephen Ambrose later wrote, "The bulldozer was not a weapon, but it did more on D-Day than most weapons." Chapter 8: What the Germans Saw. In the German command bunkers, reports flowed in rapidly. The Americans are bringing construction machinery. Obstacles demolished. Paths opening everywhere. One officer reportedly retorted, "They are building roads under fire?" Yes, they were. Because American engineers had trained for this exact moment. To the Germans, it was horrifying. To the Allies, it was liberation. The Dozers move inland. Once the beaches were secure, the bulldozers didn't stop. They pushed inland. They cleared hedgerows. They carved new roads. They pulled wrecked vehicles to the side. They filled craters made by German artillery. They built temporary bridges across streams. In some cases, bulldozers tore open the stone walls of medieval villages to allow Sherman tanks to roll through. In others, they pushed debris aside after buildings collapsed during firefights. No matter the terrain, no matter the conditions, the bulldozer kept the Allied army moving. And movement, constant, unstoppable movement, is what won the campaign in Normandy. Rommel's nightmare. Rommel had built the Atlantic Wall for one purpose: to make the beaches impassable. He believed the obstacles would slow the Allies too long. He believed the terrain itself would devour them. But he never predicted an American bulldozer. He never imagined that the enemy would bring machines designed to reshape landscapes. He never imagined soldiers would drive construction equipment into machine gun fire. He never imagined that logistics, not tanks, not planes, not artillery, would break through his defenses. But that's exactly what happened. The moment the bulldozers began clearing paths, the entire logic of the Atlantic Wall collapsed. Because the wall wasn't designed to stop machines like that. And once those paths opened, the Allies poured through them like a flood. The machine that won the beach. When night finally fell on June 6th, the beaches of Normandy were secure. Not because the infantry had overwhelming numbers. Not because the tanks were unstoppable. Not because the Navy silenced every bunker. But because the bulldozers did what they were born to do. They cleared the way. They made paths where no path existed. They turned a death trap into an open highway. They allowed tanks and trucks and half-tracks to move inland. They made logistics possible. They made victory inevitable. Without bulldozers, the Allies would have been stuck on the sand, trapped under German fire, unable to advance, unable to bring in vehicles, unable to push inland. With bulldozers, they broke the unbreakable. German officers later wrote, "America won because it brought its factories to the battlefield." And nothing symbolized that more than the humble, unstoppable, ugly, magnificent bulldozer. Aftermath. The legend of the machine. After D-Day, bulldozers continued to serve across Europe. They built airfields, bases, supply depots, tank routes, emergency bridges, causeways over flooded fields. They dug trenches, cleared rubble from liberated cities, and even built cemeteries for the fallen. By war's end, over 10,000 bulldozers had served in every theater. General Eisenhower, when asked what won Normandy, the German officer who first saw the bulldozer approach finally understood what he was witnessing. He watched as the yellow machine plowed through obstacles his engineers had sworn were indestructible. He saw infantry pour through gaps that were never supposed to exist. He watched American tanks roll forward on paths the bulldozer had carved out minutes before. And he whispered, "The war is lost," because he realized the truth. Germany had built a fortress. America had built a machine to tear it down. And in modern war, the machine always wins.